Hello, welcome back to Traben's Tomes. In today's episode, we're looking at the mid-year freakout tag. Before we get started with the questions, I do want to give a shout out to Jenn at A Jenn Who Reads, who tagged me in her own freakout video. As a fellow educator and budding YouTuber, she's been both an encouragement and an inspiration. So if you haven't already done so, please head over to her channel and check out her own freakout video and help continue to grow our corner of the community. Before we get to the official list, I want to talk a little bit about how my reading year has been going so far. Last year, I set a challenge to read 100 books, and I just barely reached that goal at the end of December. My one-word mantra for this year was it was going to be the year of momentum. And so as a result, because I knew I was going to be rereading through all of One Piece, which is currently at 103 volumes in the US, I set my initial reading goal for this year to be 200 or 250 because I knew that I would be reading that manga and I knew that I would be reading other graphic novels and comics as well, in addition to the novels that I've read. At one point, when looking at my stats, I was ahead by several days in Goodreads, and my friends encouraged me to put in, what if it was at 365? And when we put it at 365, I was only a book or two behind. And so it kind of became the joke or the challenge to now read at least an average of one book a day, including graphic novels and manga. And so currently I am just under that goal at 185 books read this year. So I have a lot to draw from. A lot of my books are going to be comic books or manga because that is the majority of what I've read. You take away the comics, you take away the manga. So far, I think I've read somewhere in the range of 35 to 40 books. So with that in mind, we will get started with the official questions. Question number one is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2023? And I have two that I've selected here, a book and a graphic novel. For my book, I've chosen Legends and Lattes. This has been getting a lot of press recently. A cozy fantasy about a former adventurer who is now wanting to set up a cafe, and low stakes fantasy is not a genre that I knew that I would enjoy as much as I did, but this book was good enough that I went and purchased the European cover after having read my American copy, just because I thought this was a nicer cover. And I would be hard pressed not to say this is my favorite book because I bought it twice this year just because I enjoyed it as much as I did. For graphic novels, I mentioned this in my June wrap up, but Bunny Mask is likely going to be the best comic book I've read this year. And this is in a year where I discovered the Massive Verse and Radiant Black, Radiant Red, Inferno Girl Red, that entire line of comics, which I feel is another really strong contender. But Bunny Mask just hits the right balance of comedy, horror, and mystery for me that makes it really hard to put down and very easy to recommend for those friends of mine whose interests would align with what I'm looking for in this kind of book. So Bunny Mask gets my number one trade paperback for 2023. Question number two is, what is the best sequel you have read in 2023 so far? And I'm going to give that to Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance. As I mentioned in my June wrap-up video, this was kind of a trial run for the remainder of the series. I read this mostly because the perspective character, the primary focus of this book, was Shallan, who was my favorite character from the first book. And having read it and gotten a lot more invested in the world, I feel like I am going to continue with this series and finish it out, even though it is such a large investment in time. There are two more books in the series already out, and each one is just as lengthy as the first two, over 1,000 pages in hardcover, and if you get the trade paperbacks, that is something in the range of 1,400 to 1,600 pages. So they are a lot to get through. But I felt like the story really turned a corner in this book, and so I'm much more invested in the characters, even those that I was struggling to relate to in the first book have gotten to the point where I'm interested in where their stories are going and what is going to happen next. There are also several characters introduced in the interim chapters that only got a one-off chapter or maybe two chapters in here, but they will be the focus in later books. They're characters that are clearly going to show up again, and there are several there that I'm also very interested in hearing about their stories and seeing their perspective of this world. Question number 3 is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but you want to? And that for me would be The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This I picked up for the book troop read for this month, and I got it the day it came out. I'm waiting a little bit longer to get this started, just so it's fresh in my mind when the stream happens, and I remember the thoughts I had while reading it. From the description, this seems to be a thriller of sorts, or possibly a mystery about a woman who, at 17 years old, saw the murder of her family, is now assumed to be the murderer of her family, but is now an elderly woman. There's now a caretaker coming in to get the details of that crime, and she's uncovering that this old woman might be more sinister than she lets on, might not be as helpless as she lets on. The summary is understandably vague because they want you to read the book, but it seemed intriguing to me, and it's something I'm really looking forward to getting to this month. Question number 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the remainder of 2023? And this is where I will kind of show my hand a little bit and admit that I don't really keep up with new releases. The things that I learn about as new releases are either what is being hyped on Bookstagram or are the reads for the virtual book clubs that I follow. There is one exception to that, and that is the Brandon Sanderson secret projects that are coming out this year. So at the start of the year, I think I got mine in February or March. Trust of the Emerald Sea came out, and then I got the Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England just a few days ago. There are 2 more releases planned for this secret project throughout the year, and I am trying my hardest to remain ignorant as to what the subject matter is, because that is part of the fun for me, is opening up these boxes and seeing for the first time what these stories are about. But nevertheless, even though I don't know anything about them other than they are Sanderson's books, I am very excited to get my hands on the 3rd and 4th secret projects that will be coming out later this year. Question number 5 is, what is the biggest disappointment so far in 2023? And for that, I'm going to have to go with The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. This was a combination of not meeting my expectations going into what I thought the book was going to be, bad depictions of mental health, some very negative messaging about suicide, as well as unlikable characters. There was very little in this book that I could grab onto. And honestly, had it not been for the fact that this was the book troop book for June, I likely would not have finished it. I would have DNF'd this book and moved on to something else. I did finish it, I just was not impressed by anything this book was doing. In its defense, the synopsis for this book sounded pretty cool. It sounded like something I'd be interested in. There is a family that has a house overlooking a cliff that is known to be a popular place for people to commit suicide, and the husband has talked down several people from not committing suicide, stepping off the ledge. And one night he doesn't. And it's billed as a suspense of like what happened that night. But unfortunately, none of the answers that this book provides are very interesting. For those reasons, I had to give this a 2-star, and it was one of the biggest flops for this year. Question number 6 is, what was your biggest surprise of 2023? For me, this is going to go to Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman. I don't own a copy of this book. I read it alongside my students at school as they were doing their book club reads at the end of the year. Neal Shusterman is an author who I feel has very good world-building concepts, but very poor execution. I was not very impressed with Scythe or Unwind, both of which I read the first book in the series and did not continue either of those series, feeling like the worlds were either too heavy-handed or were not explored in any real depth. However, Challenger Deep is a much different book. It is different in its scope, it's different in its tone. If you want to talk about a book that does a very good job representing those with mental health issues, this is an excellent book. Neal Shusterman wrote this book to reflect the challenges that his son went through battling with schizophrenia and the challenges that he also faced as a parent. And it does an excellent job of presenting someone in that situation in a very realistic and caring way. You get the sense of the struggle that the main character has in trying to distinguish fantasy from reality and the pull that each of those forces has on him, and how he ultimately chooses to get help, but it's still an ongoing process. Even at the end of the book, it's clear that this is not just a magical thing that's going to go away. This is something that the character is going to have to struggle with for his entire life. The way it's presented is also very compelling. At the beginning, you get these flashes into a world that the main character inhabits, which is on a ship, and it's not given any context at the beginning. It isn't until about 2/3 of the way through the book that you start to get the context behind some of the symbolism that is going on, and you can grasp the meaning behind what is happening to this character, what the boat represents, what the captain represents, what the parrot represents. None of those are clear at the start, but by the time you finish, you get a strong sense of what each of those symbols represents, and it allows you to empathize with the protagonist. You go through the same struggle he does in trying to comprehend what is happening. So going in with my expectations very low and coming out with something that was a solid 5-star read, that's what makes this book my number one surprise for 2023. Question number 7 is, who is your new favorite author? And I'm going to give my cheat answer first, and then I'll give my actual answer for this question. And my cheat answer is going to be James Tynion IV, whose comics I've been picking up rather religiously this year. It just seems like a lot of what I was interested in looking into ended up being penned by the same writer. The reason why this is a cheat is because I was already reading Something is Killing the Children last year. And so it's not technically a new author for me, but it is an author who I am now actively looking up and finding their other work because I've been so impressed with what I've read this year. So, along with the continuation of Something is Killing the Children, I've also read the offshoot series House of Slaughter 1 and 2. I've read Nice House on the Lake, volumes 1 and 2, and all penned by James Tynion IV. So, because of how much I've gotten from this one author this year and how he has consistently delivered the kind of horror, the kind of mystery that I am looking for, that is why I'm going to count him as one of my favorite authors for this year. My actual new to me author for 2023 is going to be Benjamin Stevenson, who wrote Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I talked a little bit about this on my June wrap up. This is a book that is a classic mystery where it lays out the rules of the mystery at the beginning, tells you that it's going to follow those rules, and then still manages to play with that, still manages to surprise you with some of the choices made here and some of the reveals made. I also mentioned that I don't feel like this is a mystery that you're able to solve as you read it, but it was entertaining nonetheless. And I felt like it really did harken back to those classic murder mystery episodes like Poirot or Murder, She Wrote. If you are a fan of classic murder mystery stories, this is one that you should definitely pick up. Question number 8 is, who is your newest fictional crush? And honestly, I am a 36-year-old married man, and I should not be caught up in it, and it's Cress from the Lunar Chronicles. Cress is adorable. She and Captain Thorn are my OTP for this series. Cress is the MVP of this group. She is a hacker. She is directly responsible for solving most of the problems that they come across, especially in the final book, Winter. And her and Captain Thorn actually have some character development over the course of the story. This is my fictional crush for this year is Cress from the Lunar Chronicles. The next question is, who is your new favorite character in 2023? And for that, I'm going to go with Viv from Legends and Lattes. I feel like Viv's story is one that a lot of people can relate to. Even though it's set in this medieval fantasy world, the fact is she's grown tired of her current job and she wants to do something that will make her happy. I feel a lot of people can identify with not doing what they would like to do right, and trying to do something that they find meaningful. And so because this is a character who sets out and her entire journey is I have done all I can for my adventuring days. I've done all I can for my adventuring party. And now I just want to settle down and make something for myself and make something that will make me happy. I empathize very strongly with those sentiments. And so for those reasons, Viv is my number one new character for 2023. Next question is, what is a book that has made you cry this year? And that is going to go to Six Crimson Cranes. For 90% of this book, I assumed it was going to be kind of a mid-level 3.5 or a 4-star YA book, but the end hit me so hard with the revelations about the stepmother, some of which I saw coming. Some is telegraphed pretty well within the book, but other aspects of it were just so heart-wrenching and so sad that I teared up at the end. It was really bad. Not only did this book make me cry, but those tears, the fact that it drove me to that emotion is what bumped this up to a 5-star read for me, really hit me in the heart. And so for those reasons, this is going to be my pick for the book that made me cry. The next question is, what is a book that made you happy this year? And for that, I'm going to choose Space Battle Lunchtime. Now, I've only read the first volume of this series. I am looking for the other two, but unfortunately, at least the middle book, volume 2, seems to be out of stock on Amazon. So I haven't finished the story yet, but I have started the journey. This book picks up the plot very quickly and throws you into a wild, an insane alien cooking show in which the contestants have to make these dishes with surprise ingredients. And we have a human who has no idea what they're doing. They're completely out of their depth, suddenly thrust into this and having to make desserts and make foods with ingredients that they have no idea what they are. And that alone would be absurd enough to be entertaining. But add to that the fact that there's this insane cast of characters, many of which are very lovable. The entire production gives me a feeling of like a Saturday morning cartoon. And while it does have some bleak spots, particularly the ending, when you find out what happened to the person that our protagonist is replacing, it still had enough fun and levity and heart and comedy to make it one of the most uplifting and funny books that I've read this year. All right, the next question is, what is the most beautiful book you've bought this year? And once again, I'm going to highlight the Brandon Sanderson Secret Project books with Tress and the Emerald Sea. In addition to the embossed cover here and the lovely binding and the beautiful art on the back, we also have these pieces of art in the book itself that are these full page art spreads that are absolutely gorgeous. I feel like this is the most beautiful book that I have purchased this year. And the last question is, what books do you need to finish before the end of 2023? And there are so many. Come take a walk with me. So here are the comic books we bought as part of a sale that was going on at one of our local comic book shops. This is technically my stack that I need to finish, but I want to read several of these others as well. Here's my TBR stack for this month, minus the books that were over by the camera for filming purposes. So this is maybe about half of what I want to try to get through this month. I have a fairy loot box coming later on this month, and I have several other books that have not gotten to my TBR but are sitting on my shelf. And so, yeah, there is a lot to get through this year. I'm not in any way hurting for books, but that's not going to stop me from buying more. I'll wrap up my mid-year freakout tag for 2023. Please let me know down in the comments if there's something you saw that you would be interested in hearing more about, if there's something you'd like me to do a dedicated review on or hear more in-depth thoughts about. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.